So how do you think you being what he described as a casual wrestling fan helps your podcast? And how do you think it also hinders it, maybe?
Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
Yeah, it's all good.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Tim, but from Tim and Joel Call It in the Ring on Fightful Overbooked. So welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
So if we take this back, just to get a basis of your fandom, where does Tim first discover wrestling?
Yeah, so I got into wrestling when I was like 12, 13 years old. And it was actually because I went to a Blockbuster video with a buddy of mine. We had rented a PlayStation 4, or no, way older.
Whoa.
PlayStation 2, one of the old brick ones. PlayStation 2 for the night. So we had that. We had Grand Theft Auto Vice City. And this friend of mine was like, let's pick up a couple of wrestling DVDs. And I was like, wrestling? Okay, sure. And he picked up WrestleMania 17. And I think one of the like No Mercies from around that era. And then we rented a couple of the wrestling video games, but we actually just rented like the N64 ones. So we had WWF No Mercy and we had the WCW versus ECW, I think it was, the N64 games. So we started playing those and I was like, oh, these are actually pretty fun. And then we watched WrestleMania 17 and that kind of got me into it. This was several years after WrestleMania 17, I think, that we had watched it. So when I started watching wrestling, it would have been like, I remember like John Cena was just kind of starting to be a person. Like he was still doing the hip hop gimmick, like really, really early days. So I think like,
maybe 2002, 2003 ish.
Spot on. Exactly that. Yeah. So that's when I started watching wrestling.
Okay. So continuing on with that, how did, obviously because you watched the 90s stuff and almost the early 2000s stuff way out of date, when you discovered what the current product was doing, how did it compare and how did that maybe change your fandom? Yeah,
so I guess this was the transition, like post WCW collapse, and they were just starting the Ruthless Aggression era stuff, and I actually enjoyed the Ruthless Aggression era stuff, probably because like a lot of it for not the best reasons, because I was like a young, like early teens boy, and they were still doing like all of the diva
HLA
stuff.
For example.
Yeah, exactly. So it was stuff like that you know, I got into it. It was still kind of edgy. They still bladed and stuff. Obviously as like a 12, 13-year-old boy, I was just really drawn to kind of the more the edgier stuff with it. So it was all about the Attitude Era for the most part for me. So I did go back and watch a lot of stuff. Like I ended up getting just a bunch of tapes at that time, tapes, DVDs, and just started getting into the older stuff first. But I kept up with Raw kind of regularly. Like I watched it every Monday night. I sat there for all 3 hours. It felt a little easier back then than some of the 3-hour shows now. But like I didn't really notice too much of a difference. I really thought like the ruthless aggression era kind of carried itself for a little while. But it got to a point where I just outright stopped at some point, and I can't quite put a pinpoint on that. Part of that was just life stuff. I went to university after, you know, a few years into it. So around 2007, I probably stopped watching wrestling entirely, except like it happened slowly, like over time. I would watch the pay-per-views, but I stopped watching the TV shows.
Yeah.
And then I'd watch SummerSlam and Mania, and then I just watch Mania, and then I just stopped watching like at all, pretty much, until Joel kind of got me back into it. So it was a very strange like journey for me, where I like very much enjoyed it when I was young, then abandoned it entirely. And then I only got back into it because Joel noticed that I was going to the local indie shows, because that was kind of, I never really lost my love for that. So we'd go out, I'd bring a bunch of friends who had never experienced wrestling ever and introduce them to that.
Fair enough.
Then, yeah. And that's kind of what got me back into it, I guess, to start with. And then Joel.
Okay. So a lot to unpack in there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sorry, I took you on a journey. I took a simple question and went through my entire timeline.
No, I like that because it's content.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So what was I going to say? Like, how do you think your fandom would be different if you discovered the Ruthless Aggression era stuff as an adult today? And how do you think your fandom would be different if, say, you discovered 80s wrestling as a child?
That's a great, as 80s wrestling as a child. I don't know. Like, that one's tough because, like, I'm not a huge fan of the 80s stuff, like, as an adult. I never really got into it. Like, there's some people that I found I enjoy, but they always end up being 90s folk. Like, but like
Fair enough.
90s. Like, I get Roddy Piper, but like I don't really get like some of that. When an elbow drop was a big deal, I never really got into it. Like, it just doesn't do much for me. Mostly because they were bigger guys, they were slower guys. I definitely lean towards more of the like flippy stuff, like the gymnastics. The gymnastics guys are kind of who I'm more attuned to. If I had come across the Ruthless Aggression era as an adult, I don't know. It's really
like
tough
now with no experience, shall we say?
Yeah, I don't. I might have shut it off. I might shut it off. Like,
fair enough.
And like, I really enjoyed it as a kid, and like, I still enjoy going back to it. But it's hard to separate that nostalgia from like who I am now versus who I was then. Like, I feel like every few years, like, I changed so much as a person that this was such a. It's hard for me to think about that. I don't know. I think I'd probably just shut it off, and I don't think I'd keep watching.
Fair enough. So you talked about your co-host Joel there. So how did he overall get you back into wrestling?
Yeah, so we're both musicians in Toronto, and that was a big part. We had kind of met each other a couple times through a mutual friend. They had played in a band together. I played with his friend, like, in the band currently, and he just kind of picked me out in the crowd while I was there, like, hanging out with a bunch of people at a couple of the indie shows. He's like, "Hey, so you're into wrestling? You like this stuff? Like, come see this show." And he took me to a better indie production in the city. We went from one that was like, it's pretty fun, it's chaos, but I would just like get drunk, bring my friends who had never experienced it, and show them that spectacle.
I love doing that. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah. That's always fun.
Like, it just blows their minds because they're like, "Wrestling's stupid." I was like, no, come, just drink a little bit, come hang out, watch this, and watch it live. Like, it was such a big difference for them, right? Because we were right ringside. Like, I'm there banging on the ring, yelling at the heels, they're shouting back at me. Like, it was a different experience for them. They were like, what are you doing? I was like, they're not gonna hit me, it's part of the show. Like, it's not fake, buddy. Like, so we do that, and then Joel just messaged me, come to this show. It was much better, but it was more of a like middle of the afternoon thing. So it was just me and him, and a bunch of other people were there. But like, as far as friends, it was just me and him. We weren't really drinking. We were just watching the wrestling and appreciating it because we both knew kind of deeper into it. Because when I was a teenager, I got hard into it, like the wrestling world news or whatever. I've read all of the dirt sheets like online as quickly as I could. So when I was a kid, I was super deep into it. So I kind of retained some of that deeper knowledge, but I didn't have anyone to talk about that with in my late 20s, early 30s. So
do you need to
found
go?
Joel. No, he's just making cute noises. Don't worry about that. I think he's making those of the cat.
Fair enough. Just checking.
Yeah, thanks.
So fair enough. But then how do you what's the word? Brain. Please don't have a brain fart right now. How does that then lead to Tim and Joel Call It in the Ring for you?
That's a great question, because I don't even know how we got to where we are now. Originally, this was pre-pandemic when we kind of devised the idea, like just before everything hit the fan. And I thought we were going to do just a podcast like an actual podcast, because my experience with podcasts was solely an audio medium. We record, I edit it, you know, and then we throw it up on all the various platforms and people listen to it. And then, and I figured we'd talk about like the TV shows and I'd get back into it, and that would be part of the angle that we'd come at it with. But I also thought it would have a lot of the like local content, and we kind of focus a bit more on Toronto, talk about some of the shows that we were going to see and things like that. That went out the window when everything moved inside. And so we pivoted and focused on all the TV shows. And I knew that AEW was coming out. Like I had watched the original Double or Nothing because a different friend had told me about it, and I checked it out. And then it turned into this massive, there's so much content. Like I didn't really watch NXT. I didn't know it existed. But he told me about that. So we started watching 4 shows a week, I guess, at the time. And then he introduced me to what the wrestling community does online, which is this video podcast format. Seems to be the vast majority of podcasts. So we ended up doing that. I was like, yeah, I have all the equipment because I make, like I said, I'm a musician and I make music videos and all that. So I had everything I needed to just do it. Yeah. So we just jumped into that, and I was like, okay, I've never live streamed anything except for like video games to 2 people watching, mostly just so my friends could watch. So like, we'll give it a shot. So we struggled along, tried to figure it out. Joel's definitely the guy who has taken the lead on it because it evolved into such a different thing than I expected. And yeah, I think my angle is just that I'm not as heavily in the wrestling community because I'm bad at Twitter. I'm so bad at Twitter that I have nothing to say. I never really participate, but he's deep in it all, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. So how do you think you being what he described as a casual wrestling fan helps your podcast? And how do you think it also hinders it, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. So I think where it helps is that it gets kind of like twisted with how it is, just because I am way less invested in this. And, you know, it's tough to say that because I still do a weekly podcast. Like that takes a certain level of, of attention to it that I think is like a bare minimum. So like I still know a lot about wrestling. Obviously, it's just I missed a large period of time and I didn't go back past when I was a fan. So like my knowledge starts when I was a fan when I was a kid, ends in around 2007, 2008, and then picks back up. And I've never really filled in the gaps. Joel introduced me to some things. Like I had never seen the Pipe Bomb promo, so he introduced me to that. Yeah. Because I stopped watching when CM Punk, like as CM Punk was coming up. He was the straight edge guy, but he was like a mid-carder when I kind of quit. And then I had never, and for, you know, the other example, I'd never seen Dusty Rhodes's Hard Times promo. And so he introduced me to that. And I was like, oh, there was some gems, like there's some really good stuff back here. So like maybe, you know, and like I wish I could fill in the gaps. I really do. But the problem right now is that there's so much wrestling content, and I do a lot. Like that's the other difference. The thing that keeps me kind of casual to this is that like I just don't. Wrestling is one of many things I do. Like I said, I'm in 2 different rock bands in the city. I make music videos with them. I have a full-time job that has nothing to do with it.
And you have a kid as well.
And I have a baby and a wife and like a ton of friends. Like I just did a Hot Ones challenge Saturday night. Like I do a lot outside. Yeah. I've recently recovered.
Oh dear. A lot of
So that's the big thing for that, as far as like where it gives us an edge. I think it's a very different perspective. My like at times like indifference to things that other people are like very, very into. Like some stuff I just don't have the emotional reaction as much as other people do because they're so invested. Where it hampers things, obviously I say stupid things sometimes. Like
fair enough.
Like, and then people will call me on it, and I'm very like I'm quick to acknowledge like when I make a mistake and things like that. So it is what it is.
Fair enough. Because you're a casual fan, in your own words, what do you think it would be easier to walk away from Call It in the Ring because you're such a casual fan of wrestling?
Yeah, and like part of it, the main thing that keeps me doing it, because like there's been times where it's tough for me to find the time to do it, is that I just love working with Joel. Like I rarely have the privilege to work with partners who are, in this specific case, more driven than me, and more organized than me. Like normally I'm the guy who has to take charge in every one of my projects. Like I have to be the one who spearheads everything and keeps everything organized and pressures people to keep showing up and doing the work. In this case, that's Joel, which is, it's nice to take the secondary seat. And so like part of it, I just love working with Joel, and I want to keep working with him on whatever comes up. I could see it being easy to walk away from this. Like if it becomes too much for him and he needs me to take more of an advanced role, I don't see that happening, just because it's tough for me, especially with the social media stuff. I don't have the chops for it. Like I've tried a million times and I just don't. It's hard for me to express myself on social media in a way that I find meaningful. Like the interactions I tend to have there are thin. So
I appreciate you sharing the tweet then to get questions. I'm not.
Oh yeah, I do my best. I just wish there were more followers to see it for you, buddy.
Fair
there's
enough.
Only like 100. There's only like 100 people paying attention to me at any given moment, and I'm sure at least 50% of them are bots.
Fair enough. So, how different though do you think your chemistry is with Joel, and off screen and on screen? And then, do you think the show would work if it was anyone else in your roles?
I thought Joel can work with anyone. I think you've seen, like, he's got so many different people he does shows with.
Oh yeah.
Me, I don't know. There's a lot of people in the wrestling community who I think I do get along with just fine. I think I'd see eye to eye with. I could be a secondary person as long as they take the lead. There's no world where I'm the one who's the true host. Like I'm just the guy who shows up and spews whatever. And it's all opinion. Like it's just me expressing like my very subjective viewpoint on what I'm seeing. And I'll bring in some other things just from like my business career and stuff like that on the other side, but it's never well researched. Our interaction is like what we do on the show is just us talking. It is exactly how we talk to each other off the air as well. Like we're really like the thing that I think is nice about us is like we can disagree and it's not a big deal. Like I think it's
not like end the Zoom call, I'm never talking to you again.
Yeah, like I think it's a good model for a lot of people because it shows respectful disagreement when we're not on the same page. But it's also like we recognize that the stakes are low. Like there's no it's not life and death. It's a subjective wrestling opinion. So
as I always say to people that get a bit over invested in wrestling sometimes, it's only wrestling.
I know, like this is the type of thing. I just love how it's only wrestling. It's one of the things that it's just not that important. Like I'm just here to have fun. So
fair enough. And I think more people need to take your approach, if I'm honest, my friend. So why was Fightful Overbooked the perfect place for you to launch Tim and Joel Call It in the Ring?
Honestly, Joel did all the work with Fightful. I had never heard of them, but when I came back to this, I was like, oh, these guys are pretty on the up and up as far as like putting together news. Like they were the replacement for like all of those old websites that I had seen back in the day. And I looked at what some of the other ones were, and they all did weird stuff that I didn't enjoy. So I did. Fightful felt comfortable. Yeah. Like they were, like I don't want to be like too political about it, but they politically felt aligned to kind of where I'm at. It wasn't as toxic of a community as some of the other places I had kind of ventured into. And I followed kind of everyone at the start. Like I didn't know who was the go-to at this point. And I've just slowly been like catering it to what I want to read. And then we were slowly growing, very, 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 very slowly growing on our YouTube channel. And I didn't know what to do because again, I'm no good at socials. And Joel and I were trying different things. We were trying to get the channel a little bit bigger. And we were showing up on all these other, like we were showing up on the Fightful live streams, things like that, just to kind of promote. And then when I think it was the Late Night Grin changed, Jeremy's partner.
The distraction.
Sorry. See, this is when I say the things that
It's
show
cool.
my ignorance. So when that kind of shakeup happened, Jeremy went to Joel, and we were just like, this kind of came together. It felt like, oh, okay. I was like, wait, fightful. No, I'm not doing this for hundreds of people. He's like, no. It's not the same. It's like they're ESPN two to the same thing they describe it
I
as. And I was
describe
like,
it as
okay.
their developmental.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that I can work with, because I don't want to have to worry too much. I don't want to jump into the deep waters like that quickly. And we saw they had a good subscriber base, and it was something that we could work slowly in. And yeah, like I've been helping out behind the scenes doing some editing. It's slowed down a little bit, but Joel just had a kid, so I think he's settling into that.
Oh yeah. So one thing I am curious to know before we do a segment that I call generic questions is
Okay.
I asked Joel this question, which is where, like, as a musician, what is something you use as a musician that from YouTube and vice versa?
As a musician from YouTube, sorry.
What is something you use as a musician what is something like a skill set that you've taken from being a musician and use during your YouTube show? And then what is a skill you've developed doing your YouTube show that you now use as a musician?
Yeah. So
I hope that question wasn't too wordy, but
no. I understand now. So yeah, essentially, I think I've taken more from being a musician into this. Like I know I've screwed up everything. I've done every weird mess up, screw up, like embarrassing thing on stage you can do. So I think I'm not as concerned to do, silly stuff on the show. A lot of it is bad and doesn't land, and I do what I do, and it's fine. But then there's other cases where, like I had to do a long time of just waffling, like banter on stage. So sometimes I would just have to do the back and forth on the mic, waiting for a song to start. So I feel like filling in air has helped quite a bit from being a musician into the YouTube show. The YouTube show stuff, I think the live streaming skills are kind of the only thing that I took from the show and applied to being a musician.
fair enough. So now, Tim, we are going to go into a segment that I call generic questions. This is where people that have seen my videos before will know I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite wrestler or superstar, favorite theme song, and favorite tag team of all time. Basically questions that I'm sure they get asked on Twitter on a daily basis. But now they'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this, go watch this. So what's your favorite match of all time, Tim?
Okay, I'm actually just going to move him real quick.
No worries.
Yeah,
I'll just pause. Right. Just to let you guys know, we had to deal with some childcare issues. So that is why there might be a slight gap between recordings, correct?
Yeah. Baby got a little bit whiny. Just gave him a new distraction. Things get old when you're a baby.
Fair enough. So as I was saying, we're about to go into a segment that I call generic questions. This is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite tag team, favorite superstar, and favorite theme song of all time. So what's your favorite match of all time, Tim?
Favorite match of all time is probably the WrestleMania 17 TLC match.
Fair enough.
I know that's probably a lot of might be a lot of people's answers. I think that was just such a spectacle when
it's really not like it's not one that I get a lot. I'm not gonna
really lie. Good then, because I unashamedly am very, very happy with that pay-per-view. Like I loved that match, and it kind of got me into wrestling.
Fair enough. I'm gonna ask favorite pay-per-view, but judging by what you were just saying, I'm going to assume it's X7.
It's X7. I will comically also say Invasion, because going into it with no context was hilarious. As a kid,
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. Apparently, that's not a widely held opinion.
You should talk to Pete Quinnell about that from Wrestle Talk, because he said something very similar when I had him on.
Yeah, like I watched it and had no idea about anything, so it was pretty good from a completely like clueless perspective. Now
the way he phrased it was he basically fell into WWE marketing and video packages and got swept up in them.
Exactly. Perfect. Like, yeah, notable mention.
Favorite Favorite superstar or wrestler of all time?
Triple H. He
Fair
was
enough.
booked as the guy. I was a huge Motorhead fan, so it was like, yeah, Triple
Ooh.
H. Yeah.
Favorite theme song of all time, like entrance theme.
Ooh, that's hard actually. Because like as a musician, I really, really like that's what I was huge into new metal when I was 12, 13. So
Fair enough.
um best theme song. I do like The Game, obviously. Like the Motorhead one.
What's your opinion on Lemmy at X7? I think it's X7.
I think so. Yeah, because I mean that definitely helped like get Triple H because it was him and Undertaker that
But
night.
have you actually listened to it? It's where he goes,
No.
it's all about the game and how he doesn't know the words.
Yeah, he's Lemmy. He's blasted out of his mind when he's on stage.
Probably, yeah.
And like they're not playing that show at their or that song at their actual concerts, so it's not something he's just kind of engraved in his soul. Yeah, I'm sure if I go back, it's terrible. I remember like the Undertaker theme later on with Biscuit was pretty fun. But
Fair enough.
yeah, I enjoyed that entrance.
And then to wrap us up, favorite tag team of all time.
That one's harder. Oh man, I really liked the Brood.
Cool.
Yeah, the entrance. And that's largely like the video games. I think that influenced me on that, just because like their entrance was so cool.
This isn't a question I normally ask, but favorite wrestling video game of all time.
Oh, I think I played SmackDown versus Raw 2006 like to death. Like just like
so did I. That was my first one as well.
Yeah, like I had a billion creator wrestlers and just or however many the maximum was.
I think there was a season mode as well where Teddy Long gets hit by a car.
Yeah. I played that one so much. Like I really just loved it. I was and at that point I would kind of just invent stories in my own head. I'd just be running it through exhibitions, like had it all written out on paper. I was kind of a dork.
That's kind of fun. That's kind of really cool.
Yeah, like I made my own kind of story modes. It was fun.
Fair enough. And as we wrap this up, Tim, the question I end all my videos on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general. We're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of way. So what is one podcast or video on YouTube that you're like, don't go back and watch that. I've grown a lot since then. And then what is one that you're like, if the good people want to check out my body of work, make sure you check that one out.
Oh man, I don't know that I have a good one. There's one where I start the show wearing I think a pair of underwear as like the Randy Orton mask day after his the day after his like burnt face promo where he had that really generic luchador mask. Yeah, I think that's probably the worst one. As far as best, I don't know. Watch whatever we do next week.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, because it sounds like Tim might have to go do all the crying.
I definitely have to go.
So as we wrap this up, Tim, where can the good people find you?
Oh, they can find me at Tim Stone P, TIMBSTONEP, Twitter, Instagram.
Where can they find Call It in the Ring?
They can find Call It at the Ring at timandjoelpod.com or Fightful Overbooked. Just go to Fightful Overbooked on YouTube.
It's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Rubbish. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Rubbish. Follow bodyslam.net for my show with Cassidy Haynes, the WrestleWatch podcast. And follow the WrestleWatch podcast on Twitter for updates about the show. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.